Welcome to the Roundtable Perspective. I'm your host, Lee Artz. I'm joined today by my guest, Larry Brechner, to discuss public media and the cuts made by state and federal governments. Welcome, Larry.
Thank you. So glad to be here and on my old stomping grounds at Purdue Northwest.
You've probably listened to Larry already on Art on the Air, Eyes on the Arts. He is a fine arts photographer. He serves on the Chesterton Arts Center board, the Hobart Arts League, and he's also on the board of Lakeshore Public Media. Larry has produced more than 230 musical theater shows, 300 community concerts, and over 1,000 school concerts. He got his bachelor's from Purdue Calumet. It's now called Purdue Northwest. He got his MA from Purdue Calumet, and he got a DFA from Breyer State. We are going to discuss today, as I already said, public media, the importance of local art, and the discussion of public media cuts by state and federal governments. In April, the Indiana legislature cut almost $4 million in state funding, claiming it doesn't represent their conservative viewpoints. In July, the U.S. Congress eliminated $1.1 billion in funding for public media, which was reducing the federal funding by $13 million for 17 Indiana public media stations. That's close to about $7 million, more or less, in lost state and federal funding. Some of the largest cuts affected stations in Bloomington. WTIO lost $1.3 million. WNIN in Evansville lost over $1 million. The station WFWA in Fort Wayne lost over $1 million. WBST in Muncie lost close to $1.2 million. And WVUT in Vincennes lost over $1 million. I think the first question I have is, what has been the loss for the NPR station, 89.1 FM?
And for Lakeshore Public Media.
Lakeshore Public Media.
For both,
yes.
Because it's both a NPR and a PBS station. And well, I actually don't have the number, but I can give you a percentage. We estimate that about 30 to 40% is affected just by the state cut. And that's a significant part of our operating budget. And as you know, that was a surprise because the budget, it crossed the governor's desk, still had the money in it. It actually went to the legislature and the money was in it. And at literally the 11th hour on the Wednesday before the vote, they yanked the funding. And the problem is a lot of the legislators who support public broadcasting in Indiana didn't even know, and of course they voted for it. Having a part-time legislator, they were anxious to get home. They were ending their session and they were surprised.
So they didn't even vote?
They didn't. I don't know if they would not pass the budget because if everything was done, but they didn't know that piece had been pulled out. And that was kind of I would think kind of a sneaky thing. I think that should be something that we would discuss and not just put out. And that's something that's very sad. And how it's impacted Lakeshore. We produce local content. My show I produce on my own, and I basically give it to Lakeshore. But it would affect our shows like Regionally Speaking, the television version of Eye on the Arts. We have a show called In Studio, which are all local programming. And the biggest one we're doing lately is with First Things First Porter County. It's called Building Blocks. And it's a documentary along with a series of podcasts. And they were tremendous. Actually, we were farming out. We're actually going to finish the 7th one, even under our current circumstances. The problem was, and this is something, I've been board chair for almost 7 years. I've been on the board for 20 years, and I started with the station in 1993. They dragged me on to be a pledge host. The quick story on that, I was in leadership Northwest Indiana, and the guy who was their development director said, hey, you have degrees in television from Purdue, then Calumet. Yeah. And within 6 months, I was on air pledging, and because I can speak Lakeshore fluently. Long story short, though, is that this Building Blocks program was produced as very, very successful. But when we got the thing, we knew eventually we'd have to do layoffs. And I, unlike board members who serve on a board, I was kind of in the trenches. I've worked pledge with these people, I've worked on productions with these people, so I was kind of an in the trenches worker, B2. So I went in the day that we had to lay off the majority of our staff because I felt their pain. I know these people. And so we're down to like 5 people running both radio and TV operation. We have a person for radio who's our production, person for TV, our traffic person, our digital media, and our office manager. And we fortunately have, when our CEO left, which was good for him because he knew he needed to get a different job, and he was in Maryland Public Television, which they were happy to have him. We have an interim CEO who's coming in, and she worked with us before in the transition between CEOs. She's pretty much volunteering her time to help us during this transition of survival, and that's what we're at.
Yeah,
We're in a true survival mode right now. We are pushing our pledge currently. I mean, we're out there, asking for money, saying, this is your station. And always, for many years, one of the problems that Lakeshore has had is that we live in the shadow of Chicago.
Yeah.
Meaning that we have WTTW, a major flagship station in the PBS system, and then you have WBEZ, an excellent NPR outlet. So, we exist under that. And of course, as a PBS station, we are like a second-run station. WTTW gets to run their shows first, and then we get the second run on them. So that's always been a problem, but now it's even more. What the interesting thing is that half of our support from members comes from Illinois because they view us as an alternate PBS station. Because in the daytime, we don't run children's programming. We run, it used to be like Sewing by Nancy and other alternative things. Some of the adults like to watch that. I always used to say in Pledge, when I was doing Pledge, and I still do it, is that Northwest Indiana deserves its own PBS and NPR outlet. We represent about 800,000 people, and that's the size of about Indianapolis. So the problem is, because we live in that shadow of Chicago, we don't see ourselves collectively like that. But that's always been the goal of the station, to try to bring forward local things and bring the best of everything.
I just read that in May that the Department of Education said that they were going to cut the Corporation for Public Broadcasting Ready to Learn grant.
Yeah.
It's been in existence for 30 years now, and they would broadcast Mr. Rogers, Sesame Street, Reading Rainbow, other programs. So I guess the question is, what will these cuts mean for early childhood development? Because at this point it said that PBS Kids reached more than 15 million with 364 digital streams monthly.
Right.
So what does the cancellation of the grant that's no longer available, what is it going to mean for early childhood development? Because many parents rely upon
Sure.
it. I know when my kids were younger, you'd let them watch Mr. Rogers or you'd watch Reading Rainbow. And
PBS in their kids format are going to have to figure out a different way to finance that. I know the bigger restriction, as you well know, is the FCC restriction that public broadcasting can't run commercials in the traditional sense. We've sort of got to the line where we are running enhanced endorsements.
Right, underwriters.
and these underwriters get pretty close to the line. I mean, you look at the River Cruises one, Viking River Cruises, those are pretty close to a commercial ad, even though they don't make the line to cross is they don't make the ask. They don't make the actual. You must go to this number. Or so. So yeah, that's the line. And of course, right now the current administration, FCC, is even looking at that. And I mean, that would be a horrible thing if they no longer can do even enhanced endorsements, just mention ones. But back to your question, is I think we're going to have to look for other revenue streams. It may have to be going much more private. The membership thing has actually in the last maybe 10 or 15 years been on decline, having people become members of your station.
Yeah.
The big transition was going to sustaining memberships. You did the one-time thing. You would say, you can buy this mug for a $50 pledge. Now we do sustaining pledges where we sell the actual product of what we're producing, the actual show. If you like this show, become a sustaining member at $5 a month. Well, that doesn't sound like much. And I always used to do it one pledge, compare it to what your cable bill is. What do you pay for your cable bill?
Yeah.
What do you pay for a newspaper? Well, that's going away too. But what do you pay for these subscriptions of things?
Or a streaming service like
Right.
Netflix, right? Yeah.
So we have to now compete in that market, and so that things. And the other thing I would say is I think public broadcasting stations, this will apply to Indiana, needs to follow the model of like Wisconsin Public Broadcasting, which for years have been kind of a pretty decent network. Their individual stations may run different shows on their different stations, but they work more collectively. Indiana didn't do that. We did have Indiana Public Broadcasting, kind of a loose consortium. But there was never that whole real networking. I know our CEO that just left, Chuck Roberts, he and I were working on kind of making a collaboration between us, Fort Wayne, South Bend, maybe not really an official thing that we would, give up things, but like cooperation that
programs.
we could, right, programs, swap programs and things like that. What could we do in northern Indiana before this thing happened that kind of sunk us? And I think we're going to have to look at alternative models for public broadcasting to survive. And some of the things that are happening, and you're seeing like the pledge drives, but you're also seeing maybe more corporate support, because there's obviously an audience. People trust public broadcasting. And the thing that I think, I'll say against the conservative music has against it, is what small part of news is part of NPR and PBS is only a small part of what we do.
Yeah.
I mean, WBUR is now getting rid of the American Experience. Their last thing is in the can. It's going to be Kissinger airing this fall. They're laying off their 12 people. And I guess people don't understand about the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which on September 30th is their last day of existence.
Yep.
What they did is they would give these individual stations money, and because it didn't come directly to PBS or NPR. So it was always interesting to see the balance sheet would come in. Oh, we got our CPB check, and out the door it went to NPR or PBS. It was mostly to help us buy programming. But one of the other things we do, and we haven't quite figured this out yet, they took care of the licensing of like music and all the other things like that. We're not exactly sure who's going to pick that up. Do the individual stations now have to do that? I mean, we report it, but we never had. So those are some things that are just up in the air right now.
Well, I have a larger question here, because when you talk about the cutbacks from Corporation for Public Broadcasting, what is that going to mean for the larger society? I mean, this is a huge question, but what's the impact going to be on larger society?
Well, you're taking away an entity that funded it. The funding was the federal government gave the CPB the money, and they distributed it. Now you disassemble that whole thing, and even if you decide 2 years later, putting it back together will take several years.
Yeah.
You have a whole entity that did this. This is how public broadcasting did business, and now we have to figure out how we do business without a CPB, and so it impacts what programs. And see, and a lot of people think PBS produces all their own programming, but PBS and NPR gets programming from PRI, and there's 3 other major ones that produce programs for us that license it to it. So it's not just PBS and NPR. And of course, you have people like me who produce their show for free.
Yeah.
I do have an underwriter for my show just to pay into Lakeshore. And actually, on a side note, we used to get an Indiana Arts Commission grant, who also suffered from cutbacks. We used to get what's called an art project grant. That would support the little station, WVLP, where we originated our show. And that was $4,000 a year. For a small station, that's a community licensee, that was huge money.
Yeah, that's big money.
They didn't get that. In fact, I went through the art project grant. They only did about 2 grants per county, and they listed us, as well as I in the Arts and things like that, as art adjacent. That we didn't really produce art, we just supported the arts by what we did. And I understand that, because they took a 30-some% cut in the Indiana Arts Commission budget also.
One of the things I've noticed is that, because I've listened to WBEZ, and they've got a very stable donor base, and they're expanding that. But the question would be, how are these cuts going to affect rural stations, how rural stations operate? Because they provide local news and emergency alerts, but they don't really have, they've got a smaller population, which means they're going to have fewer donors, fewer organizations, even fewer businesses that they can possibly appeal to. And some of them now rely upon local reporters and community knowledge, rather than what used to be, what you said before, the larger reporting collaboration that's gone away because of these cuts.
Well, you look at a whole range of Native American people that relied on that sometimes public broadcasting, especially radio, was their only thing. In Alaska, there's a lot of stations that are really going to suffer because they don't have a large audience base. Yep. But they have.
And even if large numbers of people made contributions, that's what you're talking, maybe 1,000 people that will make a $6 contribution a month, but that's not going to replace everything that came from CPB or NPR.
No, it isn't, and that's why we have to probably look at a new model. One idea I think is going to be on the thing, and this is going to apply to Indiana, is I think there's going to be some consolidation. Instead of having 17 television stations, we move to a model like they have in Wisconsin, and or like West Virginia, where Chuck Roberts, our previous CEO, came from. It's actually a state-run entity. We are a community licensee, but like WVPE is owned by the Elkhart School Corporation. There's different types of licensing, but at some point we're going to need to come together. There might be actual physical licenses for the actual transmitters, but we'll probably need to come together in a much more corporate way, in a networking way, and I think that's one way to survive because that cuts your production costs. We sharing resources, so you might have a Northwest Indiana reporter that reports for the whole state, and that would be it. And also, we are competing against streaming. I mean, I'm guilty of that too. I watch, I'm a cable never. I only had cable for 1 month as a trial, and then said, oh, this is not worth it. Because we live in the Chicago market, which now with digital channels, you have 50, 60 channels you can watch over the air. But I think over the air broadcasting is very expensive to operate. I know our transmitter we're paying $19,000 a month to operate our TV transmitter. I mean, and we're on that big 1,000-foot tower, and we have the biggest antenna up there. But and they don't really want to negotiate that price down either. But I think over-the-air broadcasting, unfortunately, is not going to be as big an entity because you can watch everything streaming. We stream, like if we could cut out our over-the-air transmitter, most people can stream us. Most people do have streaming access now. They can watch our station or listen to our radio station by streaming it. I mean, in fact, my show, Art in the Air, it's broadcast on Lakeshore on Sundays at 7. That's a dead radio night, I know that. But we are the most downloaded podcast on there. And of course, we also get the exposure to NPR. And I'm just using my show as an example. Regionally Speaking, which would be our news magazine for the radio, unfortunately has gone away because the woman who produced it, Dee Dotson, is now just literally running the whole radio operation herself. She doesn't have time to go out and do the interviews she did before, which was really what paid us apart. When I do pledge, I would always explain to people, I says, we bring you stuff content that matters to you, right? About your local politician, about what's going on here or there. So, that mission right now is even in jeopardy. We are just literally now staying on the air. So I think the survival, maybe some form of consolidation of all the stations in Indiana, sharing resources.
Well, I read recently that 95% of Indiana is covered by public media, which is huge. I mean, you're almost talking the entire state. So if it reaches 95% of Indiana now, what are these going to? How are these cuts going to change public media in Indiana? I mean, you're saying look for a different model, but what's that going to mean in the shorter term? Because if they're closing stations or they can't raise the funds to keep the smaller stations open, it's a big hit. Right.
Had this come to us slowly, like if the state of Indiana said, we are going to cut you out over 2 years, phase it so that there was time. The fact that it was an instantaneous cut, there's that whole expression, I think they wanted to kill it to make sure it was dead. And I think that was the thing. And there's not a lot of people realizing the value of, they're looking again, I think, at the news aspect and those types of things. So we'll kill it. I think the term I heard is, we don't want to pay for something that hates us, is one of the terms that used on the other side. No, and again, when you undo something like that, I mean, look about the history of, Johnson wrote the act in 1967, and NPR and PBS were each founded in 70 as a result of that. It's got this long history if those start falling apart, how are you going to put it back together? And I think like putting something equivalent to the CPB back together, if you have another administration that comes in and say, we really want to have that, it's going to take years to recon. And the point you said too about there's a lot of stations will be gone by then.
Yeah.
And
it's hard. It'll be hard to get them back because, like you have a tower.
Right.
And the tower goes away because you aren't paying the monthly fees.
Right.
So what do you do when it's time to put the tower up again? I mean, is it going to be more expensive? Probably it'll be more expensive.
The funny part about the tower was we used to own the tower. And when we were looking at finances, it's always been a struggle. We sold the tower to have operating cash. So it was, we sometimes kick ourselves for that, but each thing.
It's like the city of Chicago selling the toll bridge to the private company, and they just keep jacking up the rates, and that money's gone forever from the city of Chicago.
It's terrible to be a renter. Yeah.
We don't have a lot of time left, Larry, but I wanted to talk a bit about what is the relationship between public media and arts coverage, which is usually highlighted by local media. You have several shows, and what's the effect going to be on the local history, the culture, and the community values of the stations that are
Sure.
integrated with these things? I mean, you've done many photo exhibits. Some I read about recently, but so what's going to happen to these narratives that are highlighting the life and experiences of that particular local culture?
For Lakeshore, our Eye on the Arts television part is, again, on a hiatus for right now, and whether, we have to see that, because when we laid off the staff, we have one television person, and so with that, he can bring in the people temporarily, like if there's project money specifically, like for building blocks, but to go out and do those things and do our other thing like in studio and some of that. So you don't get the coverage. One pledge my co-host and I have made is that Art on the Air, my show, will still be there because it doesn't cost anything. I produce it out of my home in a home studio. We use Zoom to interview our guests. We're going to be there no matter what, whether we'll still be on an NPR outlet that remains to be seen, but we'll still be there because we're out on multiple platforms. But like programs like that will suffer. I mean, right now
this is going to have an effect on tourism. It's going to
Right.
have an effect on local business, even local restaurants. I mean, if you're doing a thing, we got that little license plate with the covered bridge
Sure.
on all the plates. Well, where are the covered bridges? Is there a covered bridge in, I don't know, Vincennes or somewhere else? And people come to that place just because
to see
to
Park
see the
County.
bridge. Yes, so
and
that's going to affect tourism, and it's going to affect local businesses and their ability to bring tourists to the town.
Sure.
All of that's going to.
Well, Indian Arts Commission is now under the jurisdiction of economic development. They got moved into that, so they're moving it, but they're not giving them a lot of money to do things. I think a lot of the private firms, I know Lily is talking about what they can do to help arts and things in general.
Yep.
There's some conversations going on there. I'm part of the Regional Arts Council, which is part of our district here for Indian Arts Commission. And so there's discussions about where can we get money to supplement that the state is backing off from. But you're right, it's a major part of economic development and how you're going to let people know what's going on. And
Yeah. It strikes me the same thing with the tariffs that have
Right.
been launched against other. Somehow there's supposed to be an infrastructure created in the United States so that we're all going to make more cars and we're going to have more agro industry, but that takes years to
Right.
happen. It's not like it's going to start building a factory to make a new Toyota or something.
Sure.
That's not going to happen. In the same way, I would think the same thing is true here when you cut the legs out, as you said. If you would have done it over 2 years, you actually could adjust to that. But when you do it immediately, in fact, there were already funds set aside for 26 and 27, I believe, but they clawed those back
Right.
and said, we're cutting it all right now.
Yeah, I know. It's a major loss, and yet I still hope and remain optimistic. We may be going through a dark time, and then maybe this is foolish on my part. Maybe I'm not, feeling like that's right. But I'm hoping and that somehow that public media will come out of this on the other side. We may not be a broadcast media anymore. We may no longer be using towers to transmit the things we do.
It
I
might
know.
be all digital, all
Yes.
streaming. It's possible.
And it's
Yeah.
very possible because, over-the-air broadcasting is, I know my own case. I mean, today, right now, I left my wife watching a Cubs game actually on ABC over the air because we don't have ESPN. So but I mean, I think that event you can stream almost anything you want to see, and so I think that may be the new model for public broadcasting. For us, if we didn't have to transmit, that'd be a huge saving, $19,000 a month. I mean, that's several jobs that we could probably get somebody in. I'm optimistic. And maybe that's foolish on my part, but that's maybe in my nature. I think you cut our legs out and we can make sure we can survive.
Well, thank you, Larry. It's been a delight to talk to you. Our time is.
I understand.
Our time is almost up. I want to thank Larry Brechner for joining me on the Roundtable Perspective. I'm Lee Artz, and I'll see you next time.